Out of Cruel Space, Into a Wider Galaxy, Part 56 for Newest England. Hey, boss man, how's it hanging? Looks like she got a piece of you. Or two? Mechie comments as Philip arrives. No, these are misses. She missed, and you still look like you got worked over? Rail shot is no fun at close range. How are things looking? So-so. They bought the pilot Mike Saram routine and the ID's holding up. But they know we're still on station because they've got this place locked down tighter than a prude's panties. Perhaps a better metaphor? A miser's account? An obsessive's stash? Like a husband by his wives? Michi asks. Never mind, so they're not letting us out, and Philip states as Barley enters. He turns to the young Sonir. Yes? I didn't bring this up earlier because well, I thought you were just checking on me, then we were escaping. But if you're stuck here, there are a lot of places where, well, I know about them because I spent more than one shift monitoring the delivery drones and noted they were bringing weird materials and components to a few places constantly. I'm not sure how it can help, but I don't think pointing out on a map of the station where they kept going can hurt at this point. I'm kind of like way in over my head already, and I've reached well past the point of no return, Barley says awkwardly, and Philip smiles. Certainly. Even if there's nothing of note in these places, we can all see that there's enough undue behavior by the Empire that we need to take a look or two. Philip notes before frowning. Something wrong? I need to see the data again, Philip remarks. Because unless I'm mistaken, the time between where the behavior of the enhanced grows from hyper-efficient to aberrant has been thinning. What? Wait, yeah, it did look kind of like that, but, Barley states, and both he and Philip lock gazes. I got a copy on this communicator. He brings out an adapter and plugs it into a nearby monitor, and as Dis and Helen walk into the room, they all see it. At Philip's raised eyebrow, Barley chuckles. I was working on the adapter when things started and no one got to me and grabbed it. Yes, but doesn't it work against the very concept of an incompatible communicator if you have an adapter? One, and I can break it easily. Besides, everyone goes for communicators. No one cares about the random bits of wire that the tech nerd has in him. He's got a point, bossman, Michi says. I see I am outnumbered in this. Very well, but I advise caution. Philip states and receives nods as the pattern on the screen is so obvious that the basic algorithms in the communicator light them up at Barley's command. Are they refining the process to induce instability sooner? Dis asks in a baffled tone. Or they're experimenting with something they don't truly understand, Helen says, or degrading copies of something. Mechie adds in, whichever one it is, it's not good. Philip remarks, and if Mr. Orshan is correct, then perhaps they believe there is a level of sanity or useful madness beyond the enhancement making people go nigh feral. If Miss Shinescale is correct, then it leads to the question of what it is they're experimenting with precisely, and finally Mechie's option brings in mind the question of what are they copying. It seems more like a later problem. Right now we need off this station, preferably with atmosphere and the ability to reach safety. Barley remarks and Philip grins. You're going to fit in just fine, young man. Now, we have several options in that category. First, we can simply wait this out. We fooled their searches and they have to unclench eventually. That's not going to work forever, and they only need to get lucky once, and we need to get lucky time after time after time, Mechie says. Correct. So it's not the best option to say the least. We also have the options of doing things blatantly, blowing up parts of the station and making them incapable of stopping us. And that will provoke retaliation. Something we're trying to avoid last time I checked, Helen notes and Philip nods. Correct. So there's option 3, distraction. We convince them that we're trying to do something else and shift their focus so exquisitely hard that they do not notice we're slipping out the back, Philip says as he taps Barley's communicator a touch and goes back to where he has indicated the labs. I dare say some excitement in some rather sensitive areas would leave them well and truly focused the wrong way. But first, I need some evidence to leave behind and send them every which way but mine. And what do you need for that, boss? Mechie asks. I need some news reports in the weather on a few worlds deeper inside the Empire, Philip says. I'm sorry, ma'am. We have full-on recordings of our third sweep, and as you can see, every single ship is clear. No cloaking, no spies, and no sonar. We've run into more than one warrant of gobs serving as engineering crews, cobes in medical, and METAC as security, but all of them have been accounted for at the time when we knew the short individual was present, and while we have also narrowed down several cloaking, we can also accommodate for their locations when we knew where our opponents were. I'm sorry. And sonar on the station? All female, several of them were actually looking to Court's deep dive. They have nothing of use. His image, a description, a summation of his personality, and all of it from his extended family. Several members of it are apparently of the opinion that Barley has been a bachelor too long. Captain November. A call comes in from one of the labs. Speak to me. Mixed news on the part of the gas weapon. It is effective against human targets in highly concentrated amounts, but these amounts are lethal for other species. The variant you were hit with was diluted to roughly 1/100th a human effective dose. I expect it was intended as a non-lethal distraction and visual block. If he had a full dose variant, you would be very dead. So I was being played with, November says as her grip tightens on the over-the-shoulder portion of her armor. The Axiom bandolier is a useful piece of equipment and well incorporated into her stealth armor. There is a creaking sound as her grip starts to compromise. It's structural integrity, and she forces herself into a calmer state. She clasps her hands behind her back. They're playing a waiting game with us now. We need to change it up. Begin visibly placing trackers on all vessels. We need to provoke a reaction to smoke them out and restrict water access to the bare minimum. Humans need more, considerably more. Food as well. Make the announcement loud, make it blatant, and make it scary. We need to provoke the wretch. Yes, ma'am, and one of her aides states before a flashing light has her switch back to a previous screen. Several scientists in Lab 22 Ascendants are registering as unconscious. It's going into lockdown to contain potential chemical breaches. He's there! Lock it tight! Triple guards with chemical scanners. Hold the area, I'm on my way. Philip was copying all the relevant data to things and placing it first in one data chit and then another. While this lab was interesting, there was another. This one was making chemical mixes in potential bioagents to work against Subject T-Alpha, which was his next stop. However, seeing as how what it was had apparently resisted his tear gas at 100 times concentration was distressing. Very few things had that level of chemical resistance, and a single door unbars itself. Ah, they're going to rush him. How cute. Still, he has an act to sell, and if his calculations are correct, Lab 20. Ascendance was up exactly 2 floors from his current position. First thing through the door is a shockwave of electrical energy. Something the lab tables are resistant to, so he's under them when it comes for him. He has to smooth his hair down after that, and then makes a motion of jumping downwards, even as he teleports upwards. Nice and obvious. A moment misdirection and a mistake left behind. Of course, such a mistake is obvious, and if it doesn't confirm their suspicions, will be thrown out as a fake. He lands in Lab Ascendance 20 and freezes. His eyes widen and then narrow at the broad-shouldered and strong-looking form in the cloning tube. Well, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It can only be a clone. No doubt they intended to study it for years and then make use of it as an infiltrator. After its physical age was a match for the original, which likely would be never. After all, Herbert was taking enormous advantage of his youth. They must have infiltrated the hospital Herbert had ended up in after his first brush with death, before he was any student of Phillips and became one of the first humans to be rejuvenated. It would have been beyond trivial to steal a DNA sample while he was getting his blood tested for infections, or any one of the number of battery of tests they were putting him through while unconscious, to make sure they saw any side effects coming. Age really does you no favors, my student. Those good looks fade hard and fast to leave you dull as ditch water as an adult. Perfect for a spy, though. Still, time to get you out of here, Phillips says before a barrel presses into the small of his back. Gotcha. November hisses out, and he slowly raises his hands without needing the prompting. I bet you thought you were so clever, so capable, so incredibly well put together. I knew you had a bug in that room. I don't know where it is, but it can be the only way you've gotten ahead of me so far. Well, I double bluffed it. I got you good. Philip says nothing at first. If she thinks she can't speak to her command crew without him hearing, that's no skin off his nose. The question he has now is, what kind of weapon is digging into his back? He can defend against lasers and plasma with ease. Electrical weapons are a joke as well, but that leaves kinetics. If that thing launches a blade, a disc, a needle, or what have you, it needs an entirely different protection from what he uses by impulse. And she's displayed rail shot before. Well, anything to say for yourself? Yes, did you have to jump on poor Barley like that? He's an inexperienced sort, and if you wanted a proper time of it, I could have accommodated for you. What? She demands. What? I have you at gunpoint and you want to discuss my sex life? Well, sure. After all, speaking of newborns is generally a good topic of gossip, Philip says with a slight turn of his head to smirk at her. She's uncloaked in the time since she rammed the weapon into the small of his back, but he focuses hard on her eye and sees a slight reflection of her weapon. She glances down at it, and he sees the realization cross her face. He hardens his outermost epidermal layer and makes it stronger than diamond and more absorbent than an entire ocean. The rail shot slams into the uneven surface of his back and ricochets even as the deformed slug loses its aerodynamic qualities. Philip turns and the side of his left hand crashes into the side of the railgun to force it away, and his hand clamps down on the barrel. The weapon crumples in his grip, but has already been abandoned in favor of a plasma blade extending from the back of November's right gauntlet. The railgun is thrown at her, so she's forced to dodge, even as she slices the weapon in two by sheer impulse, and Philip has time enough to shift his defense to catch the burning blade between his palms. There is a flicker of satisfaction in her face, and he shifts to the side even as her other hand brings up a quick-draw coil pistol and sends a brutal shot careening through the laboratory. She forces the blade down at him to keep him wrestling with her, even as the pistol tracks his position. Then he grabs her gauntlet and forces her downwards as hard as he can, using her own momentum to bury her right gauntlet into the floor and pin her for just a moment. His shoe meets empty air as she slips out of the weaponized piece of armor, and he's forced to limbo a touch to dodge the next coil shot. This one hits the cloning tank, and it starts to fail. The clone of Herbert slowly starting to die. Whoops, clumsy me, November taunts him, then is forced to dodge as out of his jacket, a streak in the air catapults itself at her. The edge of a flying tri-tight stiletto with a Kutha pummel nicks her cheek and draws a thin line of blood. There is a shattering sound as Philip destroys the cloning tank and catches the unconscious, unaware, and barely alive adult copy of his student. Then after disentangling him from the mess of tubes, wires, and more than a few unknown devices in a flurry, calls his stiletto back and gives November a withering glare that makes her pause. Congratulations, it is now personal. Then he's gone with the clone. Out of Cruel Space into a Wider Galaxy, Part 57. For Newest England. What the hell? Dis demands as Philip reappears with a naked man, soaked in thick transparent fluid in his arms. Help me with this. Get him to a bed. I need to make a call. Philip orders as both Helen and Dis start moving after taking an arm each. This man is familiar, Dis states. Wait, isn't this Herbert? Helen asks. It can't be. He's too old. It's a clone with accelerated aging. But that's insanely illegal. There isn't a law in the books that a large government doesn't break. Excuse me, I need to make a very, very big call, Philip states as he pulls out a very specific communicator. It seems normal, but it has a second piece of proton, and it only activates after he puts in a large sequence of numbers. There is no audible answer as the screen lights up to show a man with a blank ceramic plate for a face. Emergency situation. I need Herbert. Every nerd you can grab, and I need them 20 minutes ago, Philip states, and the blank-faced individual nods. Hold, please. The individual states in an electronically distorted tone, and the call goes blank for a moment as Philip churns the plan in his head again and nods. Sir, what's going on? Herbert's voice asks, as the sound of splashing grows more distant. I need you to get into a secure location before answering that. Needless to say, you're getting some overtime as things have gone pear-shaped. You're just out of the pool, I take it? Introducing my sons and daughters to water, sir. They've got good swimming instincts and fun all around. Life or death concerns. Yes, Philip answers. All right, got my sack. Initiating teleport, Herbert states, and then the phone lights up again to show little Herbert pulling on a hoodie and then pulling up pants over a bathing suit. On ship, the hell is going on? You've been cloned. I have the empty body here, and he looks about 25. Fuck, how long have they had the clone? I have yet to go over the information, but I'm behind enemy lines with a civilian contact, a technician, and 2 students in a lockdown enemy compound. They know I'm here, but not where exactly. I have a plan. Oh, this should be amazing. We're going to synchronize you and this clone. We're going to do a memory copy. Failing that, think you can pilot it? Philip asks, and Herbert lets out a laugh that is one part adorable for his high-pitched and innocent-sounding voice, but equally as horrifying for the sheer derisiveness in it. Oh, this is going to be one of those days. Fuck yes, I'm in. Good. Also, I need you to call your grandmother-in-law. Narrow it down, the women with that title are legion. Isma. She's in the area, and if she's alerted to this bit of silliness, I have no doubt she'll do something useful. True. So a memory download into a more physically developed clone. You do know that at the best of times, these kinds of things can go weird, right? Our biggest example of something like this ended up conquering a world, ascending to godhood and shaking the entire galaxy on its axis, last I checked. Do you have a problem with that? Fuck no. Let's kick off the next epic before this one is even officially announced. That's my boy. All right, I'm coming up on Nerd Squad now. Time to get things ready for some sheer madness. What do you mean the baseline for the clone is high ranking? November, demands the scientist. Her opponent recognizing the clone in an instant was one thing, addressing it as his student. If this was Sir Philip, and they have every reason to think it is, he has several public students, but one of the most well-known is the only publicly known leader of the Undaunted Intelligence Division, meaning an extremely high-ranking and well-recognized individual that even trying to replace will get half the fucking galaxy to declare war on the Gavali Empire. He wasn't at the time. When we got our hands on the sample, he was simply one of the only humans to be treated in a public place and whose genetic sequence was easy to steal. We weren't the only ones to do so either. No one expected him to gain rank so quickly. He was a messenger and foot soldier at the time, not even looking sideways at their intelligence division. With his overclocked regenerative coma and marriage, he looked guaranteed to be a desk jockey for decades. And instead, he is a public figure who has outright founded one of the most baffling, undaunted initiatives in the private streams, and a grand patriarch and a huntsmaster, and has successfully brought together and led a massive, centrist cross-jurisdiction coalition to unknown ends and means, meaning that this is one of the most well-connected and well-liked humans in the entirety of the galaxy, who is personally well-known by women with the power and authority to casually send armies quadrillion strong into our space. Have I left anything out? So, there are rumors he's also a master assassin and infiltrator as well. Of course, because of course! November snarls out as she starts lifting the scientist off the floor by her coat one-handed. Her mind whirls and she does not like where things are going. Does not like the results, and then her left eye starts twitching in fury as she sees the best path out. One that is galling to walk, infuriating to consider, and makes her want to spit. It is one thing to have an illegal clone of a random species. It is another fucking thing entirely to have a clone of one of the most high-ranking members of a well-liked, well-connected, and insanely audacious apex species. Especially when a living legend in-law of theirs is in our territory. Who? Grand Huntsmistress and Matriarch Isma. Living legend. A woman who has brought entire species back from extinction after putting them there to begin with. A woman that is considered an entire military force in her own right. A woman who casually shapes the entire histories and demographics of stellar nations when she's not birthing them herself. You are going nowhere but into a cell. The only way out of this mess is over your dead body. And that's what's going to happen. November hisses. Take this animal to a holding cell and keep her there. I have an announcement to make. Philip Bernard Masterson, I know you can hear me. November's voice echoes throughout the space station, and everyone pauses to listen. Even in the hidden chamber on an unassuming light cargo ship. I am dropping the lockdown and letting you go. I will not have this station destroyed or the Gavali Empire dragged into a pointless war over the stubbornness and vanity of a single stupid scientist who refused to terminate an ill-conceived cloning project when the person she was cloning suddenly gained far too high a rank and far too many friends. Huh, Philip notes eloquently. I feel disappointed. You're disappointed? I was literally woken up from nothingness and given memories to kick ass and take names, and the whole thing's been called of, Harold states as he had paused halfway through putting pants on for the first time in his life. Herbert is laughing from his side of the conversation, and there's added hilarity from the nerds surrounding him. So that's Project Maelstrom smothered in the fucking crib. Holy shit, one of the nerds says around his laughter as Harold sighs in disgust. Calm down. We can milk this, Philip says with a smirk. Oh, please tell me you're going to demand to meet my mother? Harold asks. Record everything. This is going to be diamond-studded gold for entertainment. Where did it all go wrong? Philip asks in a highly amused tone. Hang on, I've got the book on that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, Herbert quotes and gets a chuckle out of Philip as further laughter spills out from the communicator. Harold finishes pulling up his new pants and starts belting it up. A bit of axiom to warp his body a bit and his muscles harden and strengthen. A combination of strain and healing abilities to basically force his body to adapt and shift. Something the nerds had been working on and had slipped through from their side of the memory download. The transfer over such a huge distance had left Harold as a somewhat confusing mess, but he was stable-ish and could easily discern himself from Herbert. So that issue was done like dinner. The issue was a random smattering of numerous different half-tested axiom techniques and methodologies that had leaked through, ranging from the highly practical, like personal acceleration, so extreme time would stop around them, to the strange where a person could change how light bounced off an object to change its colors permanently, to the techniques that were clearly just made for the sake of making them, such as one that could allow the taste receptors of someone's mouth start giving out so much information that the tongue could act like a chemical scanner. Wait, no, that's one of the weird but useful ones. Was it the color one that was made for the sake of making it? No, and that was useful too, and... Are you all right? Philip asks as Harold pinches the bridge of his nose. Not entirely. It's going to take a while to unscramble my mind. I remember everything from Herbert, but so much from the adepts slipped through that trying to remember what's playful experimentation, a deadly weapon or an exotic but useful technique is difficult. Things just shifted. You have time now, Philip states. And while I have ideas, you have no obligation to go along with them. Remember, you're newly born. There is nothing you owe to anyone. The hell I don't, Harold replies as he rolls his neck and gets a series of cracking sounds. He grabs a turtleneck and pulls it on before rolling up the sleeves. But first things first, I want to confront the woman who made me, see what Mother thinks of her creation. And after that? No fucking clue. Am I undaunted? I don't know. Am I a hunter? A spy? A soldier? I'm no father or husband. Am I a son? A brother? Something else? I am me. That's the only thing I know for real. But that's not enough, Harold says as he mulls things over, and then grabs the rolled-up socks to start slipping them on. I need to define myself, and step one is with the cloner. Well, you certainly are taking this bull by the horns. What am I supposed to wrestle it with? The nose ring? Harold asks with a smirk, before frowning as he hears all the nerds talking over each other on the opposite side of the communicator. What's going on over there? The nerds want to give you something. Something you said reminded them of Ack. Herbert begins to explain before being cut off. You said the thing. It fits. It fits so well. This is going to be so cool. Back that up. What is going to be cool? Harold is like Jetstream Sam. Nothing to hold him down, combat power and skill, but the only truth in battle. Excuse me? Harold asks in confusion, and Philip shrugs. Never mind, we still argue. But he said the thing, so he's getting the blade. What blade? Herbert asked from that side of the call. The hell is this? Forget that. Focus and send it to your brother. Is this thing going to explode on him? The axiom in this sucker is weird as hell. It's not quite blood metal, but Jesus Christ, this is... A pair of levitation effects deactivated? A piercing and, does this thing project a blade over the blade? Send it, one of them tells him, and Herbert sighs. Harold, hardware incoming, Herbert says, and Harold holds out his hands. Axiom shifts, and then suddenly he's holding a katana for some reason. A katana? Harold asks, unsheathing the blade and feeling numerous Axiom techniques activate to make the weapon more and more dangerous the further the red blade is drawn from its sheath. The big thing about Jetstream's Sam is that he knows how to kill, but not why to kill. You have the skills to bring about mass death, but no cause. Just like Sam, one of the nerds exclaims, and then there's a smacking sound. You don't give out weapons just because someone can use them, you raging dumbass, Herbert hollers out. We had you send it because he's going to need it. He's on a space station, one that's randomly switching between hostile and calm, in a place with cramped corridors, random doorways and corners, and people able to hide in all the tunnels and hatches. He needs a melee weapon that can and will give everything the business. That sword can do it. Okay, that's better, Herbert says. Also, he's basically one of us. Sure, he's not technically sworn in, but his memories come from us, mostly you, and that means he has the undaunted mindset and morals. One of us in spirit, if not legally. Therefore, he needs a damn weapon. And Axiom enhancement or not, that blade counts as a kinetic weapon, meaning perfectly legal for a human to have. This thing is more Axiom by weight than metal. Acceleration, hardening, and strengthening effects in the handle for the wielder. Repair, reinforcement, and an effect cloaking technique in the guard that covers the whole weapon. The blade has insanely powerful piercing effect, maybe a millimeter away from the blade itself, and 2 levitation effects going in opposite directions on the flat of the blade. This thing will slice anything and then force it apart. We tested it. It forces things apart so aggressively that if you cut a bullet with it, then the 2 halves will fly apart enough to keep you and anyone behind you safe. Cutting with that sword is as much ripping things apart as actually cutting them. This thing is insanely dangerous, Harold states. That's where the sheath comes in. That's the part to hold on to. It can summon the sword back into itself and resist the sword. And if they steal the sheath, Harold asks, there's a way around that too. You see the bundle of cloth? It's called a sajo. It's used to hold it. Okay. To its side under the cloth is a hidden piece. A touch of kutha. Put a drop of blood on it. Only you or someone with your blood can then draw the sword out of the sheath. So me, Herbert, and my nieces and nephews. Siblings? Harold asks as a pang of longing hits him like a hammer to the chest. His kids are not his, they're Herbert's. And that really, really hurts. Either way, 1 drop of blood on that part, and only those with the right blood will have the Axiom effects work for them. This can be brute forced by an adept or worked around though. It's just security, not a guarantee. Neat, Harold says as he shoves down his emotions and bites his thumb hard enough to bleed. A bit of fiddling, and he finds the touch of kutha before smearing his blood on it. He feels numerous Axiom effects locked together in his hands, and he pulls out the blade without issue, sheathes it again, and offers it to Philip. Philip snatches the entire sword out of Harold's hand and then tries and fails to pull it out. He then passes it back with a nod. So then, young man, do you have a plan? Take me back to the lab I was born in and make sure the cameras see us. I want to have a chat with both the station commander and my mother, creator. Either way, I want some words with them. Ones that may end rather pointedly? Philip asks, glancing at the sword. Possibly. Out of Cruel Space, Into a Wider Galaxy, Part 58, for Newest England. Captain, they're back. They? November asks as she turns in. The spy and the clone. Standing upright together in the lab where the spy had stolen the clone from, and the clone is clearly heavily armed as they stare into one of the cameras with intensity. I would like to speak with my creator. I have questions. The clone states, and November lets out a long, low groan of disgust in sheer aggravation. How did they teach the clone that much that fast? One of her aides demands. They have access to the original you imbecile. Considering how familiar Philip there is with the original, he could very well have called him up and started a long-distance axiom effect through the proton. But that would take a host of skilled adepts working in... The Undaunted have an adept division, you idiot. Odd nickname or not, new to axiom or not, they're still insanely dangerous. Remember, each Undaunted is trained to such an extreme that they count for numerous lesser soldiers. Is it any wonder that their adepts would be the same way? November snaps out before moving up to the control panel and pressing a few buttons to open up the speakers there. She leans down for the microphone. What do you two want? I want to speak to my creator. I have questions, the clone repeats. To what end? To what end? Lady, I'm a fucking clone. I need some goddamn answers. The clone shouts towards the camera as the spy covers his mouth with a hand and muffles his amusement. What kind of answers? Why? Why have I been cloned? To what end and purpose when we're only in? The clone asks. November sighs. Little human, you are not special. The only thing special about this situation was that the scientist responsible for cloning you didn't terminate you when your original grew into too high a status. Every government does this. Every government gets a genetic sequence from a new species that emerges and tests it. You were that test. We've already run numerous different toxins, poisons, and more through your system to see what you are and are not capable of enduring. You were never supposed to wake up, never supposed to live, never supposed to learn. You are an awakened meat puppet designed to help the Gavali Empire understand humans better. If your original had stayed low-ranking, as was originally predicted, then there would be no issue of holding you. But you're too dangerous to hold on to, both politically and martially now. So go. You're not wanted here. Philip puts a hand on the clone's shoulder and the man looks lost. Just leave. There is nothing to be gained here. Nothing to be earned. We've already arrested and will try the woman who cloned you. And all she has for you is a long list of the things she tested on your body and healed you from over and over, which Philip there already stole. You're not worth fighting over and too hot to keep. There is nothing else. Just go. But, Harold says as he feels things being swept away from him, but nothing. Leave. November orders. He looks towards Philip, who shakes his head, and then both of them are gone. Tracing the axiom to, one of her aides begins to say, and November slaps her in the back of her head. We're trying to get rid of them without a war being declared on us. Stop, November retorts. I'm putting a general avoidance order on the Lavaron system. The situation went from being under control to out of control to volatile far, far too quickly. Philip gives Harold another pat on the shoulder as they reappear in the hidden part of their ship, and he heads up towards where Mechi is still controlling the synth puppet. What happened? Dis asks, and Harold says nothing, as he takes a deep breath and finds a place to sit and try to sort things out. The place he finds is in the hallway with his sword across his lap and his head laying against the wall as he looks up and tries to sort his head. That bad, huh? Helen slips down next to him, and he looks at her as she focuses her illusions away and then locks them down and out with a pin in her lapel. Her naturally shinning scales and downy head of feathers simulates a short but still very girlish haircut. Family can suck, can't it? She asks, and he starts chuckling. At least you've got some good family, right? Herbert's on your team, and I bet if you were to head to Centris, you'd be swarmed by in-laws and so many nieces and nephews you wouldn't have room to breathe. Yeah, I suppose so. Hey, do either of you have access to those files that Philip pulled out of the computer in the cloning lab? I'm pretty sure I know what's on it, but I need to be sure. Yeah, I was running it through a translation program on my communicator here, Dis says, pulling out the device and holding it out for Harold. Thanks, Harold says as he opens the files and starts speed reading. I'm going to need a medical scan. This is a what's what list of what's poisonous or bad for a liver. We're taking off now, Philip announces, and there's nodding. Does it say who stole your genetic sequence? Helen asks Harold, who starts looking through the lists again. Contractor, Marzipan Morales? I have no idea if that's just a weird name or an obvious pseudonym. Harold notes. Could go either way. My name sounds out distortion in a human language after all. Dis notes he then catches his communicator as Harold tosses it up at him. Thank you. So it was Dr. Vutrin that made me. Doesn't help much. And it certainly leaves the big question of, what the hell do I do now? Harold states. Well, there are some things you need to do. After that, though, the galaxy is your plaything. Right. I know too many secrets and am too big a leak in undaunted security to be allowed to run around without at least an oath out of me, Harold says as he shifts, and the sword in his lap jostles. He then smirks at it as he holds it up. Well, I suppose one thing I should do is learn how to use this thing properly. My CQC training is pretty good, but it more focuses on dropping the other target as fast as possible. Actual swordplay, let alone the styles designed around the katana, are rather lacking in there. He rises up. I don't know what I'm supposed to be or do, but I'll figure it out. Best thing about the galaxy at large is that you've got time. And besides, I need something of my own if I'm going to be the cool uncle. That's the spirit. If you're ready for assuring the more nervous or pedantic sorts that certain protections aren't needed, then that would be fantastic. Philip calls from the front of the ship. Sir Philip, while I do appreciate you doing this, it's entirely necessary, and it's my job to be concerned over the pedantic details. Heaven knows there's no time to truly consider them out in the field. A clipped voice responds. All right, let's get to a side room so if some kind of weirdness happens, it won't interfere. 48 hours, just shy of 2 days on the Laveron clock. Getting everything Philip had ordered done in that time had been one thing, but there was so much more that needed his personal touch now that he was officially in control of Laveron. The ship touches down and Shelley lets out a sigh. Time to get more mess sorted, and too many people are disembarking. Why is there an oddly fuzzy Sunir? And is that a Tret or another human? His face is very plain but somehow familiar. She can't place it, but the only thing that stands out about his face is that he has one. It's just so dull. So I take it there are affairs that require my attention? Philip asks. We have a few holdouts of the Vatras. They're digging into an old Blythe base and refusing to negotiate. No one wants to take responsibility for reopening hostilities and causing more deaths, and why is he smiling so much? And who is he anyways? This is Harold, brother and clone of my student Herbert. He's going to be with us until he finds a new direction. He's been granted loose leash protocols with explicit instructions to explore different philosophical and martial areas of the galaxy. A wandering warrior poet? Well, my brother has the whole spy thing down, and he's pretty much nailed to the spires of Centris at this point. So I need to travel, get into fights and arguments enough for both of us, Harold jokes. And the grin was for, Sir Philip, may I please sword fight the holdout? Harold asks and Philip smirks. Oh no, Shelley says. You can disarm them with that sword of yours. Consider it a challenge of restraint and skill. After all, just casually butchering whoever you come across is a bit of a social faux pas. Oh, is that what I did wrong? Harold asks, and Philip scoffs. You haven't even eaten anything with meat in your entire life so far, let alone killed anyone. Philip chides him. Wait, there wasn't meat on that pizza? Mitchie demands. It was a margarita pizza. Vegetarian. But the blood, Mitchie protests. Tomato sauce, Harold replies. And no, tomatoes are not some kind of animal. They're technically a berry, but tend to taste more like a vegetable. No! My entire meal was a lie? Why? Should have eaten out of my portion. I'm a strict carnivore, the sonar states. I'm sorry what's happened? Shelley demands. Very well then. Shelley, meet my contact Barley Steep Dive, or Steep Dive Barley, in the traditions of his people. He's been exposed, so now he's working openly for us. And meet the clone of my student I discovered, awoke and then downloaded the memories of my student into so that I would have an additional ally. What the hell happened? More and less than you'd assume. There was some excitement, but right as things were about to get well and truly interesting, our opposition gave up, as the stakes had simply grown much too high for their liking, and let us go. No fighting, no arguing, just opening the door and telling us to get out. And that was really disappointing. I was all hyped up to cut my way through the entire station to peel open a cell door and get answers out of the woman who cloned me. But no, I'm just a test on what a new species is and is not capable of. Whoopee! Please try not to be too disappointed that you exist, young Harold. Philip chides him and he sighs. That's not it, and you know it. Yes, yes, we must all deal with the mundane disappointment of existence. Now, I believe you were going to sword fight a bunch of war mechs and soldiers with lasers, plasma, and coil guns in an entrenched position, weren't you? I was, wasn't I? Where's the problem, and where is that in relation to here? Are you freaking kidding me? Shelley demands. Sir, your appointment is here, Private Stream tells him, and Admiral Cistern nods. The inevitable is still a week or so out, but this is something he needs to have a handle on sometime about a year ago. Give or take a week or two. Finding out a soldier had been cloned was bad. Finding out that the organization responsible for dealing with such infractions was underfunded to the point of sheer madness was worse. Finding out that these things were only taken seriously if and when a highly protected, position or moneyed individual was cloned was even worse. Finding out that the most protected and well-respected part of the DNA protection industry was tied into sperm banks basically using a 3D printing method so that a man can rent out his genetic sequence for procreation was baffling. Learning Lady Takanped and Ambassador Tal had patented and sealed his genetic sequence had been oddly touching, but baffling. He had made a note to ensure that Peter and Edward were going to get their own genetics sealed, or to double-check and see if it protected his direct descendants as well. Then the door opens and he frowns somewhat at the Valryn walking in. Well, hello, Mr. Undaunted. What can the Gavali Empire do for you? You can explain why you've cloned my head of intelligence, Admiral Cistern says as the door closes behind her. What? You can explain why you've cloned my head of intelligence. What? Must I repeat myself a third time? I do not have the slightest idea what you're talking about. Ambassador Redfeather, an ally of the Undaunted, discovered a fully developed clone of Herbert Jameson in one of your space stations. What is an ally of the Undaunted doing in our territory? Whatever he wants, I'm not in control of the man. But I do trust him, and I've been given an undaunted oath from the newly awakened and activated clone who is very much concerned as to who and what he is after waking up in a different but still familiar body to his own. Even if this has happened, which I doubt, and my government has cloned someone, which I deny, what do you want? I just want numbers and a release. A release? I want to know how many you have, and for the clones and whatever data you have extracted from them, released into undaunted custody. You just want them returned? Madam, if my timeline of events is correct, your spy or thief or whoever is responsible for this extracted the sample when my soldier was low-ranking and laid up in a public hospital. While it is still a despicable course of action to take, it's not so damning as cloning the head of an intelligence agency. Hey, you want something else, don't you? Ambassador Redfeather asks. I want you over the barrel. You and yours decided to take advantage of me and mine, so I'm putting you in a position you can't refuse me. Whether I do anything with it beyond this bare pittance I'm already asking for is irrelevant. You and your nation will know that the very people you sought to take advantage of have turned it back on you. Or do you want to find numerous trade deals, patent rights, and immigration lines to suddenly dry up? How fast do you think you can build up the industry to make the engines, airfoils, and interlocks for your enormous fleets and stations? They're not built in empire, and the Meccan Reach frowns on illegal cloning affairs. To say nothing of numerous other industrial powers, Admiral Cistern notes. But it's just, and here comes the playing down of the crime, Admiral Cistern notes. That shuts up Ambassador Redfeather, who glares at him. Release the clones and intelligence you've taken to me, and if nothing else happens between our states, then the information doesn't get released. So you're blackmailing me when you have an ally outright taking over planets under our control? I'm not his babysitter, I'm his friend. There is a difference, Admiral Cistern states. You still have hostile forces in our territory and are expecting me to just hand over leverage like that? I already have leverage. I'm telling you how to make it far less worse for yourself, Cistern tells her, and she glares at him. She takes a deep breath and sighs. Very well, I don't know the exact numbers, but be prepared for a population influx. For what it's worth, I do understand. A new species shows up out of nowhere and you need answers. And rather than kidnapping any of them, you watch them as you clone a few of your own to study the physiology. It's practical, but practical solutions. Enough with the patronizing. You'll get your damn clones. I'm going to leave now. Keep this away from the censor or you're getting corpses and not living clones. Very well. Good day, Ambassador Redfeather, he says, and she leaves. Private Stream walks in just after she leaves. So are we going to keep watching her? Of course. Out of Cruel Space, Into a Wider Galaxy, Part 59, for Newest England. The scream of tearing and crumpling metal is downright musical to his ears, an assault on all senses that outright hurts at this range, but not something that references Herbert. Not part of Herbert. Not really. Similar sounds meant catastrophe or trouble. But here, to him, to Harold, it meant victory. The battle walker staggers to a halt even as its arm slams into the ground and it turns slowly, as if the pilot inside could not possibly understand what had just happened. The pilot recovers gamely, and Harold twists to bring his sword between himself and the massive slug of railgun ammo. The bullet is the size of his fist. The bullet is sheared in half, and behind him, 2 explosions show exactly where the remains of the bullet landed. What the actual, the pilot begins to say, and Harold pumps Axiom into his everything, and time slows. He moves. The still air feels like a brick wall he's forcing himself through, one step at a time. His arms burn beautifully as he brings the sword around and the metal parts in front of the sword. With the cutting edge and advance of the actual metal, the blade itself isn't dulled or slowed in the slightest by the metal. And while the air feels like a solid object, it offers just as much resistance as the legs of the combat walker. The walking war machine starts to fall in slow motion, and Harold steps onto part of the sliced-off leg and lifts himself up. He's going to need to take a 5-minute break after this. Pushing through so much wind resistance is tiring stuff. He plants his shoes onto the still attached parts of the leg and is falling with the severed torso. He stabs the blade into the chest and peels it open as the screams of the pilot finally start. He satisfies himself with a simple hole, and by the time the battle walker's back hits the ground, he's sheathed his sword and dug his fingers into the gap he had made in the metal. Axiom flows through skin, muscle, tendon, and bone, reinforcing them all to beyond superhuman abilities, and the reinforced armor plating buckles and breaks under his fingers. He rips open the chest of the armor to the absolute terror of the pilot within, even as he starts to slow to the point where the space of a heartbeat doesn't feel like entire minutes in length. As he unveils the Agala screaming in the cockpit, he absently notes that he's left his fingerprints indented into the metal he just peeled back, and he reaches down. His right hand crushes the weapon she brings up, and his left tears out the straps of the harness, keeping her in place. The ruined remains of the plasma pistol are allowed to fall into the cockpit as he reaches in and grabs the taller, heavier, and ordinarily stronger woman by the shirt and lifts her up and over his head. "Care to say that to my face?" he demands her after she finishes screaming. "Wait, what? You told me that I looked like I was only good for a vague fuck and nothing else. Care to repeat yourself? Who are you?" she demands, and he throws her away from the ruined walker. She lands on her hooves but staggers back to try and keep her balance. Good question. One I don't really have an answer to yet, but at the same time have an answer. What? I am a clone. Today is the 2nd day of my life. Isn't that just special? You're in fear of a newly popped tube, man, he announces as he throws Axiom into a stomp, and the entire metal war machine under him jumps even as the concrete below cracks. But if you're looking for a name, little lady, Harold will do. The Herald of Doom. Fucking really? She asks him, and he pauses, suddenly self-conscious and aware of just how cheesy he sounded. Oh, get off my case. I'm trying to find out who and what I'm supposed to be, Harold says before rushing forward. He pulls at the Axiom, and she does the same. She slips out of the way of his shoe and tries to bring her fist around. Unfortunately for her, Herbert has a lot of experience in fighting bigger opponents, and Harold makes good use of them to catch the crook of her arm, swing upwards, and deliver a massive stomp to the top of her head. Agella have hard skulls, though, so the damage is minimal, but it still dazes her for a moment. He grabs her around the horns and then shifts his weight, the local gravity, and accelerates everything as hard as he can. One massive crashing bang later, and the Agala's embedded into the concrete by her horns, and he's rolling upright, one hand on the sword and a frown on his face. That was a little clumsy. I need to get used to moving with this thing. The Agella struggles for a few moments before Harold senses trouble and draws his blade. There is a scream of metal compressed into a microsecond, and there are two explosions as the pieces of the rail shot he just slashed through land behind him. Ah, good. I was worried I'd have nothing else to do, as Harold states as the Agala lets out a bellow and tears up the concrete around her horns to free herself. Fun. He throws Axiom into his system and runs as hard as he can through the syrupy and ever-thickening air, trusting in momentum and raw power to keep him moving even as reality goes out to lunch. He can see the next rail shot coming right for him. It compresses the air in front of itself like a pillow and distorts the view of not only itself, but the area behind it. It's oddly beautiful. The sword comes out. The power of Axiom places new rules on situations, modifies existing ones, or alters variables. The sword does all of them, all at once and with no thinking on his part. He could, with a huge amount of effort and practice, punch with the same effects as this sword. But to watch it cut solid metal before even making contact and force it away in slow motion. To rip and slice a target apart in the same motion to send it hurtling away to either side. Ripping or not, the cut in the rail shot is clean enough that he can see the reflection of the pursuing Agala. She's near manic in fury, has turned her fear into rage. The two halves will both miss her, but not by much. The shockwave will buffer and batter her. The combat walker launching the attack at him is cloaked, but the cloak is imperfect, designed to fool scanners, sensors, and mechanical eyes. And Harold might not be a natural being, but he is organic. His eyes find the flaws and highlight the 20-foot-tall war machine. The barrel shifts and he shifts his grip with the weapon. The next shot catapults itself into the sword and cuts itself this time. Little effort on his part. The other arm of the combat walker rises up and plasma builds up inside. He can hear the Agala behind him skidding to a stop. She wants nothing to do with what's about to happen. He accelerates harder, and suddenly the wind resistance is gone. The gap between himself and the walker is closed nearly instantly, and his sword takes out the arm with the plasma cannon. He has time enough to slash at the back of the war machine and cut off one of its thrusters. He then starts skidding to a stop. The Axiom reinforcing his clothing keeps his shoes from shredding and sending him ass over tea kettle as he has to add more and more resistance to actually control his movement. Then the shockwave hits. His own shockwave breaks his stance ever so slightly and sends him staggering. Right. There are consequences to treating the sound barrier like the speed limit. There's a whirring sound as the battle walker slowly turns to regard him, and he offers it a smile as he holds up his sword. Care for a little more off the top? That's when the arm he sliced off decides to overload and erupt into a pillar of fire. Can I surrender now? You all told me not only no, but that I only look good for a vague fuck. Where did all that piss and vinegar go? It fucking went down my leg when a goddamn man disarmed my hardware with a vaguely pointy stick, she exclaims. So you're surrendering? Harold asks. I am surrendering, yes. Then leave the suit, he tells her, and there's a pause. Do I have to? You're leaving the suit under your power or mine. Make your choice, Harold states, and he can hear a frantic banging in the suit before it cracks open, and then there's a yelp of pain from the Lopen inside as she tries to jump out, but left the harness on. Are you all right? He asks as she climbs down. No. A crazy tret with a red sword cut through the most dangerous weapons I've ever had the privilege of using. Doesn't matter what the weapon is, it's how you use it. Sticks and stones have each killed more people than any other kind of weapon ever, he says. And what if I... She shifts, teleporting and moving fast to claw his right hand and rip the sword out of his grip. She swings. He gets the sheath in the way and blocks the deadly weapon. Axiom focuses, and the sword is back in its sheath. She tries to pull it out and fails. He keeps his grip and travels with the pull to land his heels in her gut. She doubles over and loses her grip on the weapon. He slams the handle into the side of her head with Axiom to help, and she drops like a house of cards. Idiot. A brave idiot, but an idiot no less, he mutters, his nose informing him that despite her earlier claims that she had in fact not lost control of her bowels. A quick ruse to get him to drop his guard, and it had been out so naturally he had believed it. Ah well, time to... A laser beam engulfs his head and he closes his eyes to stop them from being overwhelmed. The pendant he has on under his turtleneck warms a little as it protects him from the burning heat of the weapon, and then the beam fades. He hears a gasp of shock as he slowly turns his head and his eyes start adjusting. There's a new hole in the nearby wall. They're outright shooting through their cover to get him. So he moves, pulling an axiom, and he goes clean through the concrete, catches a laser cannon swung at him, and holds it still. Are you rethinking your refusal to surrender? How are you doing this? Axiom, duh. Seriously, girl, this isn't special. If you had the spine to try, you could too, he tells the terrified soldier. But now it's time to stop. You've lost in every stretch. There's still a way out. Surrender and spare your lives. Well, that was a fucking mess from start to finish, Harold notes as he passes by Philip on his way to the temporary base set up out of casual bombardment range from the holdout. How? You won, Mechi protests in a baffled tone. Yeah, and I swung this thing around like a monkey with a stick, Harold says, holding up his sword. I used Axiom to cover up just how bad I am at a melee blitz and just how little actual skill I have. Sure, I scared the hell out of them, but I can do better, and I will do better. So you're on board? Philip asks. For now, I need to do better, be better. Oh, by the way, I invited your grandmother-in-law over. You mean Isma? Harold asks. Yes. I wondered why it felt like I was being watched. I assumed it was just the security cameras, Harold remarks before his head snaps to the side. So you are there? So you sensed me earlier? Isma asks, slowly fading into view. I figured that if you were hostile, you'd do something, but you just watched, so I moved on. Yes, you're definitely putting off thinking about things. Not the healthiest thing to do. Isma notes. Is there a healthy thing to do in this situation? I'm puppet whose strings have fallen away to find out I can move on my own. A toy fallen off the shelf that it's now standing up. A thing that's become a person. The hell do I do with that? Beyond finding some use for myself, some kind of point or meaning, some kind of purpose. 48 hours ago, I was a lump of empty matter. Technically alive, but even less so than way a fungus is. Now I'm a person, but I'm nothing. My memories aren't mine. My skills and connections don't belong to me. Even this sword is just a toy thrown at me because someone thought it would be interesting. What do I... Harold starts to rant before the flat of a tail blade bonks him in the top of the head. That's enough, Isma tells him. Yes, you're in a bad situation, but it's not one that can just be thought or reasoned out of. For all the power that a mind gives to someone, there are times it's a hindrance. There are problems that idiots solve when geniuses find themselves trapped. This is one. Then what is the answer? Is there a point? No. Is this a bad thing? No. Who are you? You are you. Now I have a question for you. And that is? Harold asks. Do you actually need more? I most certainly, he starts to say, but a black carapace-covered finger is put to his lips. Think hard now. Do you actually need more? She asks him again and he blinks. Then something seems to click behind his eyes. No, I don't, do I? That's the fun thing about questions like that. The only person who can truly answer them is the person asking. I see. Thank you. I've raised entire demographics of children. I know my way around an existential crisis or two. Out of cruel space, into a wider galaxy, Part 60, for newest England. Frigid, cold blue waters lap just over the stone. A plain practice blade whistles through the air as bare feet find purchase on the slick stone. The cold air ensures that his breath comes out in visible puffs before the scene is broken by a figure crashing through the unnaturally blue water and climbing out onto the stones. You all right? Harold asks Giselle as she pulls off the mask and breathes in the normal air. Yeah, but this thing still let in enough tire tight for me to taste it, she says as she ties the mask off around her belt. So what's it like in the Tritite Lake? Harold asks as he sheathes the dull practice blade and helps her up. Damn heavy, that is not good swimming water. Well, no, it's more metal than water. He answers. Fucking how are you two not colder than hell? Dis demands from his place in on the hood of the aircar. Why aren't you using Axiom to keep warm? Giselle demands. I'm trying to get control of my natural Axiom effects. You know, in case something weird happens. Weird? Weird how? Look at what's happened to the Vatras and their whole mental woo-woo things in the Empire. An axiom or a technique that screwed them all hard. If they decide to use that as something other than a bad idea brain boost, then it's easily turned into a weapon. I want to get ahead of any of them deciding that I need to go crazy for them to succeed. Now isn't that a mystery? How does one go where they already are? Harold asks. Oh, ha, Dis calls over. But seriously, with everything going on, I'm worried about my brain being messed with. I'm not worried, Harold dismisses. You need to have a brain to be worried about it. Dis volleys back. Oi, he's got a point, Giselle joins in. Et tu brute? Harold asks in a heartbroken tone. The hell does that even mean? Never mind, Harold says, dropping the hurt tone. So what's it like down there? Fucking garbage visuals. The tritite blocked my axiom sight, and so much light I could barely make a thing out. For as still as the top level of water looks, it's a churning mess under there. You could have entire worlds on the other side, and you wouldn't see it if it were even this far from your face. Giselle explains and holds a hand about a foot away from her face. Makes you think about what kind of monsters might be hidden down there. Jagged teeth slowly coming closer as they just wait for... Dis starts to intone and then shifts to the side to dodge a handful of tritite-infused water being thrown his way. Missed! Well, duh, you dodged, Harold notes and Dis snorts. Sure. All right, I've had enough being cold for now. You two done? He asks, and Giselle shares a look with Harold before shrugging. Come on, you've both messed around with the shallows and this drop-off you found. I'm cold, and while there may not be wolves per se on this planet, I'm like 90% sure something is hunting us. That's Mom, testing to make sure we're on our toes. Giselle, you know you're not supposed to give it away like that, Isma chides. When we're at home, maybe, but these two aren't part of our games, and we're light years from home. Giselle answers as Harold and Dis have their heads on swivels, trying to find the Zedin matriarch. Then Giselle kicks some tritite-infused water, good and hard, and the air shifts to dodge the splash. Rude, Isma notes as she doesn't so much decloak as slink out of nothingness in a single sinuous movement. She's on all six, and while the size of the aircar, she also seems like she could slip between it and the ground with ease. So are all you kitties having fun? Everyone here is a grown adult, ma'am. Correction. What we have here is an adorable baby spy, my newly born son-in-law, and one of my little girls. Isma states, pointing to each of them in turn, and Harold actually blushes and runs a hand down his face, and Isma laughs. See? Babies all. You're adorable. So, any other plans? Are you just going to stalk us no matter what happens? Oh, don't be so negative. Think of me as a chaperone. That's a yes, Dis replies. Hey, Giselle, how good is your mother at pursuit? Harold asks, and both Giselle and Isma perk up at the same time. Pretty good, but Dis tosses something at Isma. Come on! The flashbang goes off in her face, and he slips into the car before revving the engine and zooming straight at them both. Giselle and Harold both land on the roof as they rocket out over the lake and then slip into back seat from opposite sides. That wasn't enough, Giselle states. How much is? I'm not sure if there is enough, but she does love it when Giselle starts to explain and is cut off when Isma reveals she's been holding onto the underside of the aircar and is climbing up the front. Then Dis slams the brakes, and for a moment she's hanging on by only two arms as her entire length stretches out in front of the vehicle to show just how long her tail can get. Then the momentum stops and she uses her other pair of arms to prop up her chin on her fists. So, is there more? She asks in a teasing tone. Not while we keep it friendly, Harold remarks. Oh, phew, don't you worry about me. So long as you don't use anything hyper-lethal, I'm in no danger. Now how do you escape me? Isma challenges them, and Harold bursts into movement, outright ignoring a chunk of the space between him and her. His bare feet land on her faceplate, and as she moves, he pulls in further axiom, while drawing his practice blade to slash down at her head crest. Even as Dis suddenly wrenches the controls of the air car to the side to unbalance her. Giselle dives out the window as her mother wrestles with the air car and parries Harold's sword with her tail blade and grabs her mother by the armored and sharp-edged lower limb. Isma laughs as she shifts her stance, and her daughter splashes into the tritite-laden waters, and she deflects the numerous sword strikes from Harold. Unfortunately for her, the air car that the cloaken boy is driving slips out of her grip by suddenly reversing, and then she slides to the side as best she can, with Giselle holding onto her foot and the water already hard as hell to balance on due to the tritite content. Her upper arms grab at Harold, who's treating her head like a balancing platform, and her lower ones go for Giselle, who seems to think she's strong enough to pin her. Then the car comes crashing in, and Isma simply drops back fast and lets it pass overhead as Harold is suddenly in the path of the bumper. And before it fully passes over, Isma has Giselle in her grip, has grabbed onto the underside of the air car, and they go shooting over the lake again. Then Dis angles the nose of the air car straight up, as he can tell she's hanging on, and they start climbing into the air. Isma tosses her daughter upwards and into the path of the car, and then shifts around it as Harold does the gentlemanly thing and helps Giselle stick the landing. As this happens, Isma crawls around the outside of the car and ends up on top, looming over them all. Then suddenly Dis slams on the brakes and Giselle and Harold barely hang on. The cloaken lowers the window and sticks his head out. "Could you please leave?" he asks in a strained tone, and Isma swallows back the reflexive gale of laughter to have even more fun. "Oh, well, if you're going to be so polite about it, I don't see why not," she says before standing up straight and doing a backflip off the air car that turns into a dive for the lake, now a full kilometer below. "No way that actually worked," Harold says. 6, 5, 4, 3. Giselle starts counting down. "I am not that predictable," Isma protests as she teleports to land back on top of the air car and facing her daughter. "Sure you aren't," Giselle notes as Harold starts to laugh. "Sassy, sassy little girl. I raised a disrespectful child. Entirely on purpose, I'm sure." Dis sasses her from inside the car, and Isma allows herself to laugh. "Yes, I did. All right, fun's over. As you can all see, you have a bit more to work on," Isma says as she flits around the air car and then enters the front seat passenger. Giselle and Harold share a glance before both sighing and climbing into the back as Dis chuckles. "How is it you don't outright rule that space station you live in?" Dis asks. "Oh, I have an understanding with the family that runs it, partially in that they're relatives, and just as much that some of the really exotic plants and animals that the station makes bank on come from my efforts." "You're related to them?" "A few sons of mine were considered prime husband material by those girls. They're doing very well." "Tornjo and Alfred?" Giselle asks as she slips in. "Exactly. Didn't you leave them in charge during this excursion?" "I did." "Is this one of your tests?" "Giselle, after a certain point you learn how everything is a test for everyone at all times. So yes, it is serving as a test, but it's also me trusting 2 of my sons to keep my garden in order and my house clean as I go on vacation." "A vacation where you stab nigh indestructible giant wolves with your tail," Giselle states. "That's for your sake, darling. This is a little mother-daughter time," Isma says smugly. "Ah, good. I was hoping you'd be back in time for this," Philip says as Harold returns with Dis, Giselle, and Isma. "For what? What am I missing?" "A little something I'm enforcing. Rules of war. One was broken extremely blatantly when you attacked that holdout. It will likely be a few more hours until you are asked to testify, but unlike the rest of the soldiers, the Lopen woman, Uralie Snarlmane, is getting the book thrown at her, as she deserves. After all, attacking after surrendering just destroys the value of surrender. If an enemy force can't be trusted to lay down their arms when they swear they will, then there's no point in sparing them. Some would argue rules are meant to be broken." Isma pokes at him as she fades into view. "Rules can be broken, yes. However, doing so leads to consequences, such as not benefiting from any degree of immunity or bargain. The people of Lavaron are very oddly adverse to the death penalty. even when people have not only abused them, but then spurned their kindness. I do wonder why, but that is something I shall have time to learn, Philip says before turning off the view screen. Tell me, Isma, you've likely seen many clones before. For good or ill, is Harold stable? I was around when several cloning efforts to up the male population was made. They rarely end well. Treating a person as a commodity either leads to a broken soul or unrelenting warfare. Really? Things may be a little easier for the twisted in cruel space, and in that way it's well named. But Axiom gives the desperate so much power that it's fairly predictable that a slave or a person made into a product will try something. It's why you humans keep running into what you've been calling cognito hazards. Chains alone are not enough to stop people wanting to escape. They need to be in here to hold someone down, and it is the shame of the galaxy that so many methods have been found, Asma says. So if you'll acknowledge that I'm still in the room and let me in on the conversation, Harold begins to say, we're talking around you, not behind your back or over your head, Isma notes as she puts a hand on Harold's head. Still, he's doing fine. Believe me, I've seen much, much worse, and not many who's taken the revelation that they were cloned for someone else's use so well. And none who've taken it better. So what's the verdict, Doc? Harold see as he grabs Isma's hand by the thumb and pulls it off his head. That in a few years, all this is just going to be background information. You're doing just fine and going to be just fine.